live pictures of the U.S. Senate burning the well past midnight oil. I'm Ali Vitale on this Friday, June 5th. We're going to keep our eyes on them. We're also going to start with the news that they've been working on overnight, because they have been up amid a marathon session of amendment votes on Republicans' massive $70 billion immigration enforcement bill. Republicans plan to pass that bill without Democratic support. They're doing it through a process called reconciliation. You hear that word a lot. But first, they've been navigating a so-called vote-a-rama, during which senators from either party can offer amendments. There have been some particularly thorny ones. Senate Republicans defeated a Democratic amendment led by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer that would have blocked President Trump from creating a fund to compensate political allies. That failed 50-49, despite support from 3 vulnerable Republicans. Lawmakers also voted to reject an amendment by Republican Senator Thom Tillis that would have redirected the nearly $1.8 billion from the fund to combat taxpayer fraud. Meanwhile, 3 Republican senators joined Democrats in backing an amendment to bar Bill Pulte from simultaneously serving as Director of National Intelligence and head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. That measure also failed 49-49. And 6 Republican senators joined Democrats in supporting an amendment by Senator Jeff Merkley that would have blocked construction of Trump's proposed White House ballroom without congressional approval. That measure also failed 52-47. Still, some interesting votes happening there. Following the amendment process, the House is expected to vote on this immigration bill after it passes the Senate. Unclear when that vote might occur. House lawmakers have actually left town for the week. Notable and interesting. A lot for us to get into with congressional reporter for Notice, Stephen Newcomb, who's here on set with me. Thankfully, you and I both woke up to the fact that the Senate was still awake, which is always notable when they pull an all-nighter like this. But I think the thing that was so interesting is that they've now done final passage. The reason they're still on the floor is they're dealing with this FISA bill that is all around privacy, security, and government surveillance. And yet, those amendment votes were so fascinating in that there were significant numbers of Republicans that voted with Democrats, and yet nothing passed. I mean, what do you make of the ways that those votes shook out?
Yeah, nothing passed, nothing attached to the bill at final passage. You had a number of Republican senators who this week said if there was not explicit language in this bill that was restricting this DOJ anti-weaponization fund, if there was not something specifically that was done about that in the bill, they would not pass it. And it just passed without those changes to the legislation.
People like Thom Tillis made that point and then voted yes.
Yeah, so what I think you saw in the vote-a-rama was Senate Republicans sort of protect each other. You saw some of Senate Republicans sort of take strategic votes voting against amendments that maybe they would have supported on the anti-weaponization bill, allowing more vulnerable Republicans. I think, for example, Senator Cassidy, who was not running for, running for re-election but lost his re-election bid, ended up voting against an amendment that I think he would have supported otherwise, allowing other Republicans to vote in support of it, but also not table the bill, send it back to committee. They wanted to get this done this week. So I think you saw them protect each other a little bit.
Yeah, so not quite as much YOLO from the YOLO caucus. As we openly questioned, like, is this the first instance where we start seeing a jailbreak of sorts from Senate Republicans? And obviously, that's not what we're seeing. So what does that say of all the talk that we've spent time on this week of, is Trump losing his grip on the caucus, or is it just that they're being a little more strategic in the ways in which they choose to voice their displeasure with some of the things the admin is doing?
I think the latter is probably a little bit more accurate, but I also think that, you know, some of these Republicans would say that they have successfully tabled this either way. The DOJ anti-weaponization fund, taking acting Attorney General Todd Blanche at his word that this is not something that they're going to go forward with. So I would say that they're also in a space where they seem to be trusting what the administration is telling them, as long as it will not go forward with the anti-weaponization fund.
And we'll see if that ends up being enough. I think the Blanche confirmation hearing is going to be a roller coaster of a ride, so we'll buckle in for that for whenever it happens. But I think there's also some interesting things around Bill Pulte, the way that the president is trying to come out and say, well, he's going to be temporary in this role. And yet there were people like Senator Mark Warner, who we saw there on the Senate floor, that could be changing their votes around FISA because they are concerned about the role that Pulte is going to play Do you get the sense that people who were worried about Pulte are assuaged by anything that the White House has said or any of the amendment votes that came up overnight?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you heard other Democratic senators, a moderate, Catherine Cortez Masto, who said this week that she would not support a FISA extension if there was not at least some clarity around Bill Pulte's situation, if he was not removed as acting DNI director. So I think they're voting right now. We don't know what this outcome is going to be. This is a huge vote. They need to get this done. It's massively important for law enforcement, and it's on the floor right now, and we'll see if they can get it passed.
It's on the floor right now, and part of the reason why I was looking to see if we could see the floor is because Mark Warner, one of the people that we were talking about, is standing very close to the dais, and I'm interested in what the reason for that is, so we're going to keep tracking it as it goes. Again, it's always nice to see lawmakers awake with us as we do this show. Working. We love that. But there was also work being done in the House. They've gone home. But one day after approving a war powers resolution to limit President Trump's authority on Iran, House Democrats again sidestepped Republican leadership, passed legislation to provide aid to Ukraine, and imposed new sanctions on Russia in a 226 to 195 vote. 18 Republicans joined all but one Democrat in supporting that. The measure would provide military and reconstruction aid to Ukraine while imposing new sanctions on Russia. House GOP leadership opposed that bill, with Speaker Mike Johnson expressing concern about the timing of the vote. Despite clearing the House, the measure still has to pass the Senate and ultimately would require Trump's signature. And so, again, as we try to make sense of, in the last 2 weeks, how much of this is Republicans choosing their moments versus bucking the White House, how does this vote on Ukraine aid fit into that larger picture that we're seeing?
I think it fits in pretty nicely. I mean, you're going to get a good idea of where Republicans are on President Trump's foreign policy. I mean, you would not be blamed for forgetting that the Ukraine war is happening with everything else that's happening sort of internationally and that Congress has had to deal with. This is a space that they have not engaged with over the last few months. And I think you're going to get a good idea on the House floor how many House Republicans are willing to stick Senate Republicans are willing to stick with leadership, and how many of them want to see fund aid for Ukraine.
Well, because do we actually think that the Senate moves on this? And if they do, is it in any way that is substantial or even close to passing it?
Right. That's the question. They have their own Russian sanctions bill that they've been sort of having in their back pocket. They've worked on and sort of teased with over the last year and a half. Will they, won't they? So they have their own version. And everything we know about the Senate is, they prefer their legislation over the House's most of the time. So we'll have to see if they take up what's passed the House.
Yeah, the more Washington changes, the more it really does stay the same. Senate always prefers whatever bill they themselves crafted. And we'll see, because that bill has been sitting there for months with over 80 people saying that they support it. You never see those kind of numbers in this version of Washington. So a lot for us to keep track of as the Senate hopefully comes close to finishing up their business. I know our Senate producer would very much like to go to bed. Jack Fitzpatrick, we thank you. But for now, congressional reporter for Notice, Stephen Newcomb, we thank you as well.
Thank you.